Well, thank y'all again for joining us today. We'll probably have a few more people filter in. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Liz Eckelkamp. I'm the Dairy Extension Specialist here at UT. And thank you for joining us for Webinar Wednesday. So just as a reminder, this is going to be a monthly program on the second Wednesday of every month where we're talking about timely topics in the dairy industry. And Matt Webb is joining us today from Marshall County, and that's my computer reminding us that this is happening. And he'll be talking today about fence line hay feeders and repairing hay feeding areas. And excited to have him join us for today. If you have to jump off early, or if you know of anyone who wasn't able to join us today, we will be recording this meeting and posting it afterwards for people to view for credit. And I will be throwing a message into the chat in a second with the link for the post-completion survey. So if you need Master Dairy Credit or if you need Super Credit, please do go follow that link. And this will be posted on Super later today. Sorry, y'all, forgot about that for this year, but we'll get that settled. For a lot of our guys who are joining us with internet connections that aren't super stable, if you're not presenting and you don't have a question, please turn off your camera. And Matt has asked us to hold questions to the end of the meeting. But if you have any throughout, feel free to throw them in the chat and we'll make sure we get to them before the end of the meeting. So Matt, anything else you want to add?
No, that's it.
All right, well, if I turn off your video, don't worry about it. That's just me controlling it from my end. And Matt, take it away.
All right, thanks, Liz. I appreciate the opportunity to be on here today talking about this. I certainly want to, if you have questions, I certainly want to answer them. I just have a long presentation today. Two topics I've been dealing with a lot in the last 2 or 3 years, and so I got a lot of information that I want to get out to y'all on this. But the fence line hay feeders, as you're looking at that picture, it's basically your hay feeders is built into the fence. And I had a guy that came into my office 3 years ago or so, and he asked me if I had saw this video on YouTube, and I watched it and I thought it was a great idea. I started talking with some folks. I got to go take a trip up to northern Kentucky to Eden Shell Farm, where they had come up and started utilizing some of these designs. And so we were able to find some funding, and we put up 5 of these structures at the Middle Tennessee Ag Research and Education Center, located here in Lewisburg. And we've been looking at these things now for about 3 years. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I really like these things. I think they have a place in certain portions of your farm if you pay attention to the details, you pay attention to the feed pad. If you're not willing to do what you need to do on feed pads, then you're going to end up with a mess and you're going to end up frustrated. However, I think if you do construct these, see if I can move on. There we go. I think there's some benefits that I have seen, that the farm crew over here has seen, and some of the producers that I have started to work with who have put these structures on their farms that they're seeing. The biggest one is time management. I mean, we had a drone video. I'm not going to show that one today, but we timed feeding in the ordinary traditional hay rings, getting down on and off the tractor, opening, closing gates, fighting the cows off, trying to get a hay bale into the field, driving through the muck and the mud. I mean, you can cut your time in half at least by being able to put these feeders on a feed pad along the fence line. I actually have one producer who has built one this winter. His can hold 5 rows of hay in it. He has gone from what he has told me, he's gone from 8 to 10 minutes for every bale he puts out in the field to being able to put 5 bales out in about 12 and a half minutes. And he's only feeding maybe once or twice a week now. And so there's an obvious saving in time. There's a safety aspect. If you're looking here at this picture here, this is a bull lot. The producer is getting older. He didn't want to have to be going in and out of the field with the bulls anymore. And so he's put that feeder there in that lot. Oops. And so there's the safety part of that is that you're not in and out of the field with the animals. There's potential for less hay waste. We're finding that if you build the pad correctly, it kind of changes the behavior of the cattle. They come up to the feeder, and it's kind of more of they stick their heads in and they're grazing in the feeder. Whatever drops out of their mouth drops back into the feeder and not at their feet, so there's no trampling of any hay. And so there is some savings on the hay waste. Animal health and performance, we'll talk about that in a minute when we talk about the issues of mud. But the environmental and pasture damage that's reduced because of it, you're restricting all your damage to one smaller section of the farm instead of driving in and out of fields. Yes, cows produce a lot of damage on their own, but I would say that a lot of our damage is from the tractors going in and out of the fields in wet, mud conditions. So there's some improvement in in reducing the pasture damage, the water quality from runoff from these areas and different things, being able to put these in the correct place and designing these feeders and doing the things that you need to do on the feed pads. So in case you don't know what mud is, I have a 7-year-old at home. I asked him the other day, I said, what season is it? He goes, winter. I said, incorrect. He said, you're wrong, Daddy. I said, no, son, it's mud season. And we're in the middle of it right now. And so it's obvious. You can see here from these heifers here, they're standing in a lot of mud. You can see the tire tracks for where we've gone in and out with the tractor to put the hay out. There's a lot of damage there. There's a line of trees there on the left-hand side. That is a small branch that runs into Little Rock Creek here in Lewisburg. So there's some issues there that could be on the environment and water quality. It's also the same stream that the heifers drank out of. And so there's a lot of things that go along with the mud here. The effects of mud on cattle performance, it's, as we go from dew claw to shin deep to below the hock, you just keep adding about 7 or 8% changes in the weight gain of cattle. And this was some feedlot data from Nebraska. This was back 30 years ago. We know that mud drags on animals. It makes their coats wet. They can't insulate themselves as well. They spend more time, more energy trying to get through and traveling back and forth between the feed and the water and the lounging areas. And so we know that mud has an effect on cattle performance. And this is just to illustrate it also. We're going to have to feed them more. We may have to feed a higher quality diet on young cattle, on calves. We may get some infections in the navels, may deal with some hypothermia issues if it's cold and wet outside. If we're dealing with lactating cattle, we get those udders dirty. There's a possibility to have some mastitis issues in those udders, and just walking back and forth. I mean, I've seen a lot of cattle, sheep, goats this winter as I do travels across my county that are limping just because the ground conditions are so wet and dealing with foot rot and foot scald issues. So all that is attributed to the muddy conditions that we currently have. And to be honest, the last 3 winters have been wet, muddy winters. And so this is a picture. This is on the same farm here at the research farm outside of town. 2 opposite ends of the farm on the same day. You can see the dairy heifers there. They're standing in some pretty mucky stuff. Whereas the Charolais heifer there on the right, you can see the tops of her hooves. She's standing on a chert pad. And, all the tractor had to do is pull up to the feeder. There's a gravel road there that combines one pasture to another. And so quick, easy, moved on. And the cattle, she's in good shape. She's not too muddy. We see Mr. Bull here. It's this was just the other day. There's some pictures that I took the other day after a 1.5-inch rain because I wanted to, like I told you, I'm not want to sugarcoat it. I want some nasty pictures, and some of these some of this presentation is to tell you what not to do with these things. I think they're great. I think they're useful, but I think it's just as important to tell you what not to do, so that if you plan on doing this and taking advantage of some of the cost share money through ag enhancement to building one of these, is that you get your money's worth, and it works for you. These things have to work for you in your operation to make your life easier and the comfort of your animals. So you can tell here, Mr. Bull, you can see the top of his hooves. Before I got here, a lot of the heifers were lounging around here. They didn't have much mud on them. And so this pad here's been here for 3 years, and they've not added any more chert to it. So they did put some Geotech style fabric under it to hold it in place, and they packed it down really well, so that chert pad is working well. And there's, the possibilities for these feeders are kind of endless. They're kind of a puzzle. I think of them as a puzzle, and a puzzle piece in a puzzle. You can find places to fit them. I think they work well in weaning and receiving areas, because these feeders are sticking out perpendicular to the fence line. So if you're bringing in new cattle and they're walking the fences, you force them to walk into a feed source. I think they work well in addition to winter feeding. They work well in drought feeding. It's a sacrifice area. It takes pressure off of other areas of the farm, so that when we do get those rains, those grasses and those legumes can actually respond to the rain that they're getting, and they've not been beaten down to death. We've just constricted the damage to one small area of the farm. They can be used in a rotational system. This feeder here, this was at the Eden Shell farm. There's 3 paddocks. These are the heifer paddocks. This is up close to the manager's house, so he can actually see about 85% of the fields from his back porch. And so he can walk out there and observe these first calf heifers. They're close to a barn, and he rotates them through stockpile fescue during the winter months. And there's a water that services all those paddocks, so they fit in a grazing system. And so I'm going to give you the comparison of what we saw at the Eden Shell farm and what we built here in Lewisburg. And I'll tell you some things that I like and don't like about each one, or what we could have done better. The ones on the left are all the Eden Shell ones. The ones on the right are here in Lewisburg. This is the limousine model, and I put what the cost was. I like the one from Eden Shell better in this picture, because your roof overhangs a little bit better. If you need a roof, if you're feeding every day or you're feeding a couple times a week, you probably don't need a roof. They're eating the hay quick enough. But if it's going to be in there a while, a roof, I would think, would be kind of handy for these kind of feeders. And we'll talk about it some more, but you'll notice in the left-hand picture, the inside of the feeder is raised up 6 inches, and we found that to be extremely important, as far as we don't really have mud and manure that builds up more than a couple or 3 inches on these concrete pads. But having a 6-inch raise in the middle of the feeder really helps keep manure and muck out of the hay feeder. This is the Cadillac. It's the same deal as the one before without the roof. Notice that we've scratched up the pads on the concrete pads to prevent slipping. This is what they call the 4-door sedan. In their scenario, they put concrete in the middle of their feeder and gravel pad around it, and they used wooden sides. Ours here is a chert pad, and we use metal panels. And then this one here, they're both very similar. The exception to it, the one that we did in Lewisburg, is that back side of the feeder is a wooden gate. And so we can open that up if we do need to have some clean out. Then we can drive the skid steer or a small tractor right through there, and it not be a problem to clean those feeders out. And then this is the 2-door hatchback. You can take a 3-piece hay ring, take 2 pieces out, and both of them are chaining them to posts that are 6.5 to 8 foot wide, depending on what ring size you get, and you can make a feeder out of it. It's pretty simple. If you buy 2 hay rings that way, you've made 3 feeding spots. And so that could work well on some lease ground that you know that you're going to move on in a short time. Or if you got a small area for a bull lot, or even if your cow herd is just a small number, these probably would work out well. And we all know that the hay rings are covered through ag enhancement as well. So the next few slides, I'm going to talk about how to make these fit within a system on your farm. I want you to think about your labor and your chore time. As I get older and I got kids coming along, I think real hard about where I put things, because my kids, I have no tools. I'm just borrowing the kids' toys anymore, it just seems like. And so I'm trying to teach my kids to put their toys or my tools back in the same spots. And I don't want to walk around forever trying to hunt all these things down. And it shouldn't be no different than on your farm. And so this is an example that Dr. Steve Higgins, who is the one that came up with a lot of these designs, this was a producer of his in Kentucky. So we have an aerial photo. You can see where I have the arrow where it says the cow feeding. He calls that structure the Bo Renfro structure, named after a soil conservation agent up there. It's a 6-bell feeder. It's got a configuration of gates that open and closes and can go into different pens, but he basically has made himself a complex here. So he's got his hay storage that is just a very short ride from the hay storage to the cow feeding area. He has an equipment shed there next to the hay storage. He has a covered handling facility, and the chutes are attached to the feeding area. So all he has to do is bring in those cows at feeding time, lock them in, and if he's ready to vaccinate or work on some calves or whatever it may be, he has them. He has brought them up very gently. They've wanted to come up. They're very quiet, and all he has to do is start working them through his handling facility. He has a lane there that goes to 6 different pastures, so he's able to continue doing some sort of a rotation on pasture. And he has a creep pen for his calves. So in the next picture, there's the hay structure there, the feeding area, and you'll notice in those pictures there's no calves. And the calves can come in here, but what they have chose to do is that he's got a creep gate on that small pen off the side of the lane, where they have access to their own hay ring. He may have a creep feeder in here, and so they can have their own lounging area away from the mamas. This is one of my producers here. He has just recently finished this up back in the fall. But this was an area that had already had a lot of gravel in the area, so he continued to build that up. There's his hay storage. He has his 2 hay rings there, so it's a very, very short tractor drive from the hay storage to the feeder. Actually, on the back side of the hay storage, or his hay barn there, is the hay field. So the travel from the hay field to the hay storage is very short. He's not carrying hay bales all over the farm. This is the main feeding area. He does have his area where his heifers are. He does have a separate area for them, but he's got his water there. He has a lane that goes out to his fields that he's rotationally grazing, and so he's got an easy access point there. If he was to add some feed panels into the fence line, he could probably feed his grain on the outside of the pen there, and that would work well too. But just know that all these things are contained right here. It does not take him very much time at all to feed his cows or to observe and see how they're doing. This is the newest setup at the research farm outside of town here. Um, they actually have they had this old um, concrete pad that they were using to store bagged silage on. And now that they have gone all to beef heifer development, they no longer, they don't cut any silage at all anymore. They just buy hay or cut some hay off the property and bring in their feed. But they got about 400 or 500 heifers on the unit now, and so what they've done here on this one, they got J bunts where those heifers are fed a concentrate diet, and then there's three feeders at the end there behind the stack of hay there. So when they come in the feed, it don't take the tractor long at all to fill up those feeders. We have a lane here. They can close the end off there, and they have them caught when they come and feed them. And then it directly goes into an area where there's a working facility. So all these things are self-contained to reduce time, effort, and increase the safety of the operation. So just some layout suggestions, locations. This is critical. Got to put it in the right place. Ridge tops and flatter areas are preferred. We don't want to put them down in the lowest part of the farm and creek bottoms or anything like that. I mean, we can't prevent mud, but we can reduce the effects of mud, and putting these in the right area will definitely help that. Try to have them away from natural water sources. This setup here from Eden Shell Farm, it's on a ridge top, and there's many hundreds of feet away from a stream from this area right here. You may use a buffer, which may be a small area that's kind of fenced off away from a water source. Not to say that you don't graze it from time to time, but in critical times like in the winter, that may be closed off to catch any sediment or fertility that comes off of these feed pads. Be awesome to have good access to a good road. That just keeps you from driving in and out of the mud and reducing time. Close to your hay storage would be great. Working facilities, your pasture rotations. Try to keep your waters 150 feet away if you can. I know sometimes that's not possible, but when you put feed and water in the same place, what you've done is you turn cows into welfare recipients. And so there is some maintenance on these pads. You're going to want to clean them off and use that manure in other places. But if you put your waters away, then they'll spread some of their own waste going in between the feed pad and the waters. And then pay attention to your design. So, when you look at your design, 8 foot wide, and you can scale these as long as you want to. I've seen some feeders now. Most of ours over here are 2 bell feeders. I've seen them go as far as 8 foot or 8 bell feeders, as long as the tractor is able to push those bells forward. If you're using a concrete pad, you can also push bells forward a lot easier because you got a slicker surface to deal with. So probably want them 8 foot wide. So if you do have to get equipment in there, then you have some room to deal with. If you use at least average hay quality, I think your waste is a lot less. If you're using 10 foot tall Johnson grass, then your waste is going to be much higher. And on the outside on your feed pads, allow at least 10 feet on either side of the feeder. That gives room for that cow to come up and eat, but then it also allows a cow who wants to move in behind somebody room to move too. I realize this is not a feeder, it's a water, but I put this picture up here just to illustrate that these things do have to be maintained. I understand that concrete is only as good as the edge, and then there's a drop off. And we talked about it on a presentation last night, that you might want to add some, if you go with a concrete pad, you want to add maybe some gravel at the end of it. I think using something like soil cement, where you mix in cement with the soil that's there and till it all together, it'll pack up pretty hard. Those could be some options there at the edge of these pads. But it's no different than around gates or waters on the farm where we're trying to maintain those areas anyways. manure and waste management, that could be an issue. I tend to think of it more as a positive. I like to think that we can take that manure and put it somewhere where it's needed, and so and maybe reduce the fertilizer cost. And I've already mentioned about hay quality. I think if you at least have average hay quality, your issues with waste will be a lot lower. Um, but if we're using some very steamy stuff like Johnson grass that's been cut too late, then we'll have some problems. Uh, just want to mention, if you're using chert pads or rock pads, over time, most of the cow's weight's on the front end. She is going to wallow a little bit out of the way. So you are going to have to go in there after 3 or 4 or 5 years and add some more chert or rock in those areas just to build those pads back up. And so I'm going to go over some things of not to do in the next few slides. So this will be a good time to take some notes maybe. But this is one of my producers here. This is an example of a good location. It's right there next to the hay barn. I took this the other day, so it was after a 1.5 inch rain. It's on a concrete pad. And this is the feeder where I told you it takes him about 12.5 minutes to put out 5 bales of hay. And so you can tell he's got his working facility there. We still got some things that we want to do to improve around the building there, but that works out really well for him. This is not an ideal location, and I was talking to one of the farm crew over there. Some of these research farms, we do some things just so we can tell y'all how not to do things. And this was a set of feeders that got put in kind of a hollow place. And essentially, when we have any runoff that comes off that hill there, the feeders are damming it up. And the problem with this feed pad here is that there was no access to bring in any equipment to help clean some of this stuff up. And as you're putting hay in there and you're having water that's rushing in from the side, that hay is just wicking in that moisture, and it really hurts your utilization of your hay. And so they have changed out the gates. They took those solid panels out and put in gates, and that has helped with the cleanup a lot better than it was in years past. But we are looking at maybe moving these to the top of the hill where it would be much better for both getting hay in there and also for the cattle too. This is another producer I went and visited. This is brand new. He put it in 1st December. He's dealing with a lot of things. The concepts of this barn I like really well. He works a construction job, so sometimes he's traveling. His hay storage is right there, so it's an easy come in, get the hay, turn around, and put it right in the feeder. He's got 2 feeding stations there, so if he wanted to block off somebody, all he has to do is close a gate, and that animal is there, and he can watch her if she's been having problems or whatever. He's got a creep area down at the end of it, and so those calves can get access to hay themselves and to creep feed. The problem is that some of these products need to be done when the weather's dry, and he put in chert. His plan was to put concrete in. It's still the plan. He is building a house currently, so he needs to get that completed. But he put in chert and didn't pack it in well enough. So if you're going to put in a chert or rock pad, be sure to do it in good weather so you can take the time to press the pad down, get it good and flat and solid. And so we do have a mess here that we're going to have to fix, but the design of it's good. There's some issues that we noticed after the fact. His working facility's all there, so everything's in one containment. But one thing we did notice, and you can tell he's trying to fix it, is that there is a hill. This is actually the hay field. And so it's a short drive from the hay field to the barn, but it slopes off towards the barn. And so the barn was kind of put in a hollow of a hill a little bit. It wasn't Wasn't drastic enough that either one of us noticed it at the time, but he is putting a trench around the area to try to move the water off away from the barn. And he does have plans to start capturing the rain off of his roof there so he can put in a water trough there close to the barn. So when you do your feed pad construction, you know, we've talked about roughing it up so that so we reduce any animals that might slip. Put at least a 2% slope on this pad, and for a 30-foot pad, that means the upper end is going to be 8 inches taller than the lower end. So be aware of that. We started putting a pad in and thought we had messed up, but that it does look funny, but that's the way it's supposed to be, a 2% slope. And then pay attention to your fence design and your gates, because you know, you want to be able to move equipment in and out of there if you need to. This is a feed pad that they did not put a slope on it. And so it looks worse than it is. When you step out there, there's only about 2 inches of muck out there. This was a concrete pad here. And so some of it does run off, but it's not enough slope to make it all run off. So it's a little too flat. Also, that if you're going to clean this pad off, you do have to drive down a gravel road a couple 100 feet, and then open the gate and then come back to it. So it needed to have better access to scraping this concrete pad off. This is another setup from Eden Shell Farm. It might be nice to have a bunker set up for manure storage. Many of us is already piling up manure around our hay rings and different things, but if you have the opportunity to store it and then use it later in spring, that would be great. This is just a different picture here of this setup. He can basically come in one gate and go out the other and work around this feeder. This is another nice setup. There's a head catch in there. There's some calving pins in there, and those gates on the calving pins actually open up and attach to the post that's on the feeder. So if you do have a cow that is calved and maybe having some problems, then all you have to do is open up a gate and she has access to hay. And so that takes out just another job of bringing feed to her. And we talked about roof designs earlier. Just make sure your roof overhangs the feeder. Think about orientation to the sunlight to help dry out any moisture. Maybe possibly think about adding gutters to help move water away from the feeder. And so there again, there's overhang there that works much better than the one we constructed here in Lewisburg. We talked about earlier about the inside of the feeder pad having 6 inch higher than the rest of the pad. And the reason for that, the ones that we built here in Lewisburg, it's only about 2.5, 3 inches taller. We're still getting some wicking from the outside of the feeder. I talked to an agent this morning. They recently got some feeders built in their county. They did the 6 inches, and we're very much happier with it doing that and having a lot less hay waste. And if you're using something like a chert pad or rock pad, you know, you might want to build up the inside of that feeder. This one, you know, this is from a couple years ago. We had it was a very, very wet winter when we put this one in. We got some wicking from the chert pad, and so it got to the point where the cows just wouldn't go any lower, and I don't blame them. I mean, I wouldn't want to force them to go down any lower anyways. But if you're going to use something like a chert pad, maybe put some bigger rock or something that's going to elevate that hay up a little higher, and I think your hay waste and hay utilization will be much better. And so there again, you can see that 6 inches higher inside the feeder. It just helps with all the the muck that gets accumulated around these feeders. So we talk about width spacing while go, at least 8 feet. The farm crew here has even talked about maybe adding an extra 6 inches for some of their equipment if they build another one. The concern is if you get too wide, cows being able to reach in and eat and get that middle. If you go around 8 feet, I don't think that's a big concern. That's going to leave you about a 12 to 18 inch swath in the middle. If you got a pretty slick surface on your feed pad inside the feeder, all you have to do is take the next hay bale and push it forward, and then it'll be utilized. But I do have one producer that put in a 6 foot wide one, and I don't like it near as well as I do the 8 foots. And the reason for that, if you put in a bale of hay that's a 6x5 or even a 5x5 on a 6 foot width, then some of that hay is touching the outside, and we've noticed a lot more hay being wasted on the outside of the feeder because that cow takes a bite, steps back, and she drops whatever's in her mouth at her feet and it tramples it in and it's gone. Whereas if you're using 8 foot, she walks up, she puts her hay in the feeder, she's in a more natural grazing position. Whatever falls out of her mouth falls back in the feeder and can be utilized later. Now, feed panels, spend the extra money and get you a good feed panel. I asked about the gauge of the metal, look at the design, that sort of thing. I prefer a skirted feed panel. You may have to add the skirts yourself because they're a little harder to find. They're a little bit more expensive, but in the next few pictures here, you can kind of see the difference. You notice that there's on the picture on the left, the feed panel that doesn't have a skirt, there's a lot of hay on the outside of that feeder. The skirted feed panel, we don't have near as much. A lot of that hay can get blown out. These panels were not skirted, and that was just because of the wind is the hay waste that you see there. And that is 8 to 10 feet away from that feeder. So using a skirt definitely helps. Just be aware, we've noticed on some of these feed panels that the welds are giving away. So that's another suggestion on the quality of these feed panels. I mean, probably what we're going to have to do on this example here is go back with some metal screws and try to help that. When you get ready to put these feed panels on, be sure that you butt the panels up against each other and up against the post to help absorb some of the pressure and the force that the cows are going to exhibit on these. I'm kind of getting to where I like the pinned panels better. I think they are a little bit more rigid. If they do happen to have some issues, you can always chain them. Whereas if you're just using the chain setups, then we get a little bit too much wiggle sometimes. And so be aware of that. We didn't really pay attention to it before, but we sure are paying attention to it now after we've had a couple of cows break in, just because we can't, on the chain system, some of them give away, and then next thing you know, you got one in the feeder. So next couple slides, if you're having using the area that you're leasing or you got a place down the road, just some ideas on some designs that you can, if you're coming off a main drag or a main road, this is a gravel area that you could build and put feed panels on either side. And then you could put you a feed pad and a feeder at the end of it. Or if it's one of those things where, maybe there's not enough room or that's not the goal, then maybe put you a small gravel area that kind of runs into a feed pad. But, as traffic increases, I'm sure y'all all deal with it. And we got a lot of drivers that don't pay attention. And so we got to be more defensive whenever we're feeding hay off of some of these main roads. And so I'm going to jump gears now. We're going to talk more about repairing hay feeding areas. As long as I've been an ag agent, every spring I get phone calls from guys about weed control, about their pastures being torn up because they fed hay. What can they do about it? Is there anything they can do about it? And so last couple of years, I was able to get some seed and some chemical, and the farm crew over here was willing to let me do some plots. And so um, that's what we did. And so I ask you a question: is it a waste or opportunity? You look at all that, it's pretty beat up. We've already talked about how cattle plug up the ground, walking back and forth and trampling. We talked about the tractors going in and out and compacting and causing ruts and different things. And the soil structure changes too. I mean, the picture on the left, you can see that that after a rain, that ground's been capped off and it's going to crust over when it dries out. And so this is what we see most of the time, and this is what I kind of consider a waste. We leave our hay rings out there. We don't do a whole lot to the ground after we're done feeding hay, and we can grow a very good crop of pigweeds here in Tennessee. I don't think there's any state that can grow them as good as us. And we can grow them short. We can grow them 8 foot tall. We're just good at it. But there's some other species in there that you notice. There's some Johnson grass, and depending on your opinion, if you cut Johnson grass right, you can make some fair quality hay. There's some crabgrass. There's some desirable things that do come up. And so I think there is an opportunity. And so we're going to talk about that. So when I came up with these plots, my goals were I wanted something with a quick ground cover. I wanted something that maybe had acceptable yield. At least maybe would provide some summer grazing. I wanted something maybe that would deal with the pigweeds because I absolutely despise a pigweed. And then later on, we determined another weed called prickly cider was also a problem too, or at least in our location. And so, and this is just the reasons. Cattle might nip the ends of stems on pigweeds, but they mostly avoid them. And you can tell in the left-hand picture that they've kind of grazed around them. The picture on the right, that was in July of 2 years ago. There's 20-something inches of crabgrass there that they wouldn't touch because of the pigweeds down there. And we kind of determined the same thing with prickly cider. And prickly cider is a little harder one to deal with. Pigweeds are actually pretty easy to control in pasture settings, but prickly cider is a little tougher. It gets a little woody at the bottom. It has a little yellow flower, and the cattle don't pick at it very much. They don't like it, and so they avoid it as well. And so here's how we set it up. Each year there was about 40 plus dairy replacement heifers on this field. It used to be a fescue Bermuda field. We fed hay through 3 hay rings from October to March. And in both 2019 and 2020 is pretty similar. 2019, I looked mostly at looking at different grass species. I did throw chemical treatment in there. I had a stalker operator that feeds out about 500 stalkers every year, and he was using Grazon Next in his lots, and he was just spraying it on bare ground to keep pigweeds down. And so we threw that in there just as a test and a guess, but we looked at Grazon Next and did it with crabgrass and without crabgrass. We looked at crabgrass by itself. We looked at annual ryegrass with crabgrass and oats with crabgrass, and then I always get asked about planting fescue and clover in the spring, which, next couple of weeks, frost seeding clover is a good idea, but we've determined that with fescue, a spring sowing of fescue is a pretty risky thing. There's some guys that get away with it. Most of the time they're a failure. A fall seeding is much better on fescue, but we did throw it in there just to see what would happen. And I did all this on the same day. I sprayed and sowed on the same day, and that kind of goes against recommendations too, but we were just going to see what would happen. So this is a real world scenario. I did not get a drill. We did a rough disking. I would in no way say that it was a perfect seed bed. Everything was broadcast. We didn't fertilize. I did take some soil samples, and we'll talk about that in a minute. In 2019, I actually went out there and cut samples and harvested it. We looked at weeds. After each time we'd harvest, we'd let the cows come in and graze it, and we'd clip off any excess, and then we'd finish up the season. In 2020, I basically just looked at chemical options, and I just used crabgrass in that case, and because in our treatments we found crabgrass to work out very, very well, so we just stuck with it. We looked at Grazon Next. We either did it at planting or a month later. We looked at T4D, which is much cheaper. And then DuraCore came on the market last spring, so we was able to get some of it, and I had just enough to do one treatment with the DuraCore. So we did try DuraCore as a treatment. And same deal, rough disking. We did all the treatments with some with crabgrass, and then a couple of treatments with Grazon Next. Then all the other treatments with the chemicals, T4D, Grazon Next, DuraCore was all about a month later. And I didn't take any clippings this year. I didn't have the help, and with things that went on with 2020, we just looked at the presence of forage and weeds. And so with this slide here, in 2019, I took a soil test before we did anything, and then about mid-season. And so you can tell that this research farm was a former dairy farm, so the fertility was pretty good anyways, but it even increased over that. I mean, feeding hay puts nutrients in the ground, and you can see there, even the pH went up a little bit. The phosphorus went up a little bit. Potash went up a whole lot. But before hay feeding and after hay feeding. And then in 2020 we shifted the plots over a little bit, and so all the tests came back very high. For pH was acceptable, phosphorus was high, potash was high, so the fertility was good, and we didn't add any fertilizer at all to these plots. There's my ground prep. You can tell it's not like perfect or anything. You still got bits of hay and stuff rotting away, and you got clods and different things, so not a perfect seedbed at all. In 2019, when we was looking at all the grass species, ryegrass and oats on that first harvest was excellent. I think it's an option if you go out early. We did this on April 3rd. I think it would have been even better if we could have went out the 1st of March and been able to do ryegrass or oats. All the other ones were lacking, which understandably crabgrass doesn't really get going germinating wise to the end of April, 1st of May. And then the forage that we got from all the other ones was pretty low too. The weeds were pretty excessive in the control and the fescue and the clover. We got a little fescue to come up and a little clover that came up in that first harvest, and then it was gone. You didn't see it the rest of the time at all. So it's not something I recommend on some of these areas. And on top of that too, there's a lot of hay ground that's being sprayed with Grazon Next and DuraCore now, and that residual gets carried over in the hay, and then the animal poops it out as well. And so it's going to kill clover. And so I just, at this point in time anymore, I don't even recommend oversowing some of these hay feeding areas with clover anymore. But you notice there where we did use Grazon Next, even on bare ground, we didn't have any weed pressure. There's your comparison. This was end of May, I guess it was, kind of in the middle of May. So you see that the control, we got pigweeds coming up on the left. And where we use Grazon Next, even on bare ground, we got some grass coming up, but it's still got spots to fill in. The allen ryegrass was beautiful. It made you want to go out there and lay down and do snow angels. I mean, it looked so soft and leafy and looked good. The oats looked good as well. But they overall were not the best treatment. They were good treatments. We had 4 tons an acre, 4 tons of forage per acre from those treatments. But the winter annuals, the ryegrass and oats, prevented the crabgrass from germinating until much later, and so we had a yield drag there. So if you need early forage, put the ryegrass and crabgrass out early. If you're not going to get to these areas until the end of April, 1st of May, then I would manage it for a warm season grass and put your efforts into that. If you look there at our chemical or chemical plus crabgrass plots, and even the crabgrass plot itself, we had 6+ tons. And so, and this is from areas that we consider a waste. I think we can turn into a resource if we manage it just a little bit. And then there's our weed pressure there. You can get crabgrass to reseed and come back every year. And, you know, going back to the chemical only plot there, we didn't sow any crabgrass in it. That was just from the natural seed bank. So I am surprised. There are some farms I've been on that do not have much crabgrass on it, but then there are some farms as well that they will be blessed with crabgrass from here on, regardless. And so that's what the crabgrass and chemical plots looked like in June. And I mean, they were waist high and looked good. Obviously, we had some rain, so that helped. But we did have a drought for about 3 weeks here towards the latter part of May, and the ground did crack open, and then it rained, and this came on beautifully. And this is going back to what I talked about. There was a yield drag. That middle plot there was where we had ryegrass mixed with crabgrass, and the crabgrass is coming on. This was midsummer, the same time the picture from before, but that crabgrass was having a struggle with all the shading that the ryegrass was doing. So this is from 2020. Looking at some plots here. We did do like I said, we did do the Grazon Next at the very beginning. We had pretty good weed control all the way through. In this plot here, we have not sprayed any of the other plots yet. And so I went out that day. We looked at the weeds, and then we sprayed them when I was done. And so this is 3 days after we sprayed on pigweed. And just to give you assessment, all of them work well on pigweeds. 2,4-D, Grazon Next, Duracore, all those work very well on these pigweeds and in these kind of situations. Prickly Cider, Duracore does a good job on it. Grazon Next does a fair job on it. 2,4-D is a little weak on Prickly Cider. And so just be aware of that. And so that's what it looked like in the middle or latter part of July. All those plots that we used any of the chemicals did a good job on weed control, and that carried through to the last sampling. So when you look at some of those red bars there on the weeds for the Grazon Next, and in this case, probably with the Grazon Next that got sprayed at the beginning of the season, a lot of that chemical is probably being washed out of the soil by now. So some of this was prickly cider working its way through, and then that 2,4-D crabgrass scenario, that was prickly cider that was working through that stand. So as a systems approach, when you get done with your hay feeding, try to disc the area in April or May. Try to break the crust. Try to help the ground dry out a little bit. 5 pounds of crabgrass, that's not a whole lot. It's a light and fluffy, small seed. You might want to mix it in with sand or pelletized lime or even some fertilizer if you're going to spread it. You may want to overlap the spread a little bit because the fertilizer will shoot out, or the pelletized lime will too, will shoot out further than the crabgrass seed will. After a month, use some sort of appropriate weed control for pigweeds that will come up. If you're going to graze it, let it get to 6 or 8 inches and graze down to 3 or 4. Allow the stand to seed out. graze it down prior to frost, and then you can start feeding hay on that same spot again if you wanted to, and repeat the next year. These are the many weed control options out there. If you are in a sensitive area, and what I mean by that, say you're next to somebody who has an orchard, or they have a garden, or you have a lady in your community that's highly thought of, and her flowers are even thought more highly than she is, maybe use something like Chaparral Milestone so we don't have anything floating in on those flowers and hurt a relationship. And so if you do, if you're not going to do any kind of weed control, at least go out there and clip the pigweeds before those seeds become mature on those pigweeds. And this is just a picture of timing. UT does a variety trial every year. There's other species I think would work well if you wanted to go through the trouble of having a drill. If you already have a drill, using pearl millets and sorghum Sudans and all those would work out good in those areas as well. But this was some data that I pulled out just talking about timing. I mean, every year prior to 2019, when they, in that variety trial, they would plant their variety trials in May, except for 2019. They waited till June. They still got pretty good yield, still 3 tons an acre, but you can tell that it's slower than the May dates. So if you want more forage, if you want to try to take advantage of this, it will still work later into the summer. You can seed a lot of these warm season annuals into June. It still works, but you are going to have some yield loss versus planting early. So just be aware of that. Those are the varieties of crabgrass that's out on the market. Red River was the first one. It's been around a long time. Quick and Big came later. It's a slightly taller. Maybe doesn't come in as thick as the Red River. The Quick and Big spreader, it does a little better job than the old Quick and Big of filling in spots. Impact is a new one. It's a later maturing crabgrass, and what they have done with the brand name Mojo, which is what is in the picture here, that's a yellow jacket seed coating on it. Mojo is a mixture of Red River and Impact. So Red River comes in a little earlier, Impact comes in a little later. So they've mixed those two varieties in a brand name called Mojo. And then there's a variety now called Big River, which goes back to the original Red River variety. It's supposed to be truer than some of the Red River varieties that get sold on the market now. So talking about possible cost, if you're going to do this for the very first time, I sat down with one of our farm management specialists, and we came up with these figures. Disking's probably about $15 to do your broadcasting, and the seed cost at 5 pounds an acre. You're looking at $25 to $40 depending on the variety. If you're going to spray, about $20. And we was figuring Grazon next when we looked at that figure. So the first year would be $60 to $75 an acre to get it going. If you let that stand reseed and come back every year from the seed bank, then we figure that you're only out your disking and your spraying, and that would get you at $35. And I mean, if you don't have a disc, I have some guys that use a box spreader and it works very well. You know, some sort of a drag, anything that kind of breaks that crust up and opens that ground up to sunlight and warmth will have that crabgrass germinate. So I just want to extend some appreciation out to some of these. Of course, the research farm outside of town here for letting me do some of these things. Eden Shell Farm for having us come up and look at some of these fence line feeders. Dr. Steve Higgins, appreciate his relationship and helping give suggestions on some of the things we've done and could do better. Southeast Agri-Seeds donated some seed for me when I was doing these plots, and the Lewisburg Farm Center here in town donated some chemical and some seed as well for the plots that I got to do. And if you want to find out more information, you can look up Eden Shell Farm. They do a blog every month. There's some other designs that they've come up with up there now. that you might be interested in, there's a publication from the University of Kentucky. It's called Fence Line Feeder Systems for Beef Cattle. And then if you're on YouTube, if you just type in the search box, fence line feeders, there's a couple of videos that we've done here at UT, and then there's many that University of Kentucky has done. So those resources are out there. And with that, Liz, I have finished right at 1 o'clock. Amazing.
Good job, Matt. So there was one question in the chat already, and it was, how do you clean the manure mud off the chert pad, and how often do you do that?
Over here at the research farm outside Lewisburg, they've cleaned off chert pads twice a year. It's been about February, January 1st of February, and then they do it again at the end of the hay feeding season. So latter part of March, 1st of April, and they're just using the bucket off of a tractor to do that with. All their systems are chained too, and so they can they're chained with a boat, and they take a drill out there with them and zip off the boats, and if they need to pull the panels or the rings out of the way, it's not hard to do. And then they got a manure spreader, and they go find a poor place to spread the manure on.
All right, y'all, any more questions for Matt? Feel free to throw them in the chat or unmute and ask him directly. They never all unmute at once, Matt. It never happens.
That's okay. I either talked them into it or talked them out of it, but just be aware, I'm a county agent. Everything I recommend costs money.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think they're great if they're put in the right spot. I think they have the ability to maybe help you on time, safety, efficiency, and you just got to pay attention to the small details, just like anything else. Yeah, y'all are welcome. Thank you.
I just do want to remind everybody that I will be sending out a recording of this as well as a post-meeting follow-up. Please do not forget to fill out the post-meeting survey if you need Master Dairy Credit or in-service credit. We are glad that so many of you joined us, but this is not the best way for me to take attendance. So please do fill out that survey if you need that. And that link is https://tiny.utk.edu/ww2021. So the same thing as the password for the meeting. And any questions, guys? Questions, comments, cries of outrage?
I'm surprised that's all John Goddard wanted to ask.
I know. Ooh, Ranson unmuted. You're in for it now.
No, I was just going, I really enjoyed it. I've got some folks that already called me today, said they wanted to watch this on the video. So you are going to put this on video, like you said earlier, just you'll send that out later?
Yep. So I'll have the recording posted to our YouTube channel this evening, and then I'll send it out to everybody who registered. So if you have any of your guys that didn't register, tell them to go ahead and go through that link, and I'll send them the follow-up information.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Liz.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome.
All right, Matt, I'm not seeing a whole lot of activity, so thank you so much for your time. That was a great presentation. Definitely answered a lot of questions.
All right. Thank y'all. Y'all have a blessed day.
You too.